What if events went differently? What if Harry Osborn was bit by the spider and became Spider-Man in the Sam Raimi films? How would this affect the Spider-Man trilogy as a whole? Find out in today's highly requested fan fiction. So you guys have made it this far to part 5, and I highly recommend you guys to check out part 1 to 4, because this might not make any sense to you, but again, thank you for the amazing support for all 4 parts, and we're going to knock all of them out with the final act of the film. Now things are getting crazy. We're entering the Spider-Man 3 territory and things are on its peak, so let's get right into today's fan fiction. Harry would swing into action. Hearing the loud explosion, he knew something was wrong. He would hear screaming and he would swing on top of a building looking around. A building would be on fire with a hole in it and it would be burning. He would hear shouting and people screaming for help. He would quickly run into action and he would swing into the building, smashing himself into glass. He would look around, seeing fire everywhere, and he would hear an echo in the room. It would be getting louder and louder, and he would see a little girl coughing on the ground, begging for help. Spider-Man would quickly pick her up, but his spider sense would go off. The building would crash down, burning into flames. Spider-Man would do a backflip, grabbing her, but a pillar would smash onto his back, and he would scream in pain. Harry would fall off of the main floor, and he would drop 3 stories, crashing onto the ground. He would smash his head on the ground, and he would try getting back up. He would try using his webs, but the building would come crashing down. Everything would fade to black, and Harry would extend his hand, but he would be under burning debris, and he was trapped. Bernard would be at Oscorp looking at the news report on TV, and he would try connecting to Harry's cell, but he wouldn't be answering. He would quickly rush out of the room into the hallway, and he would get into Harry's sports car driving off. He would make his way to the burning building, but it would be too late. The building would be up in smoke, and the police and fire would tell Bernard to stay in his car, and they would yell at him. He would get out of the car, shoving them aside, and he would put his head down. The police and fire would find a burned dress, and they would tell the public that Spider-Man's body hasn't been recovered and that they're assuming the worst. They would say Spider-Man has fallen, and MJ would be on the streets of New York walking to her play, but there would be a TV broadcast saying Spider-Man is missing or dead. She would have a breakdown on the street crying, and she would run into an alleyway. People on the street would be shocked, and J. Jonah Jameson would be laughing, saying to Eddie Brock the bug has finally been squashed. Peter would walk further into the Osborn residence house, opening the secret door. His frail body would cast a shadow as he entered the room. He would look around and the lights would open bright, showing the broken down goblin suit and technology. He would see pumpkin bombs and a chamber. He would look at it and he would see full suits and glass containers. He would look to see serums with glass tubes, and he would walk down to see a table that had a green serum saying Kirk Connors. He would be confused knowing that he heard of the name before, but he couldn't place it. Peter would walk up, taking the glass tube, and he would look at the machine. He would put the glass tube into the machine, and he would put another serum from the goblin. He would see that he could fix his burned tissue and everything that he needed to get his hands restored. Peter would turn the machine on, but he would hear a noise. It would be Bernard. He would yell at Peter, telling him what he was doing, and Peter would quickly yell at him, and Bernard would pick up a knife trying to defend himself. Peter would look to see a pumpkin bomb, and he would detonate it in the room. It would go off, and the pumpkin bomb knives would go all over the room, and Bernard would duck, running out of the building. The knives would come back towards Peter, and 2 of them would go into his hands, and he would fall onto the machine. It would turn on, and the chemicals would go onto him. He would start screaming, and Bernard would run back into the room with a gun. He would shoot the machine. Peter would scream, and the energy would go off in the room, and it would explode. Bernard would look around to see nothing but clothes and broken glass. The room would go black and the lights would flicker off. Peter would be screaming in pain, but it would go away. He would look at his hands and he would see that he was on a rooftop. His hands were white and he could see that he had no clothes on. He would be confused, but he would look at himself. He would be restored and stronger than ever before. He would make a fist and let go. Bolts of lightning would go off and shoot into the air. Peter would smile, thinking to himself, it would make sense for this this to happen to him. He would be a conductor, and the electricity from the machine, and Harry's machine was his final test. The goblin and lizard chemicals would restore him, and he would regrow everything back. Peter would be laughing. He would hear screaming from down below. Somebody would be screaming for help. A mugger would have a gun pointed at an old man, and Peter would walk near the edge of the building, seeing all of this happen. Peter would put his foot forward in the air, and he would smile. He would use his energy, and he would somehow teleport from an electric pole on the street. The mugger would see the pole, and it would start to overheat. He would tell the guy to stop, and Peter would teleport in front of him. He would look at his hands, and he would point it at the mugger. He would shock the mugger over and over again, and the mugger would shoot Peter, but it would go through him, and he would smile, and he would finish the job. A giant flash would go off in the sky, and screams could be heard. The old man would run off as fast as he could, and Harry would wake up hearing a scream in the distance, and his spider sense would go off. His hands would break free from the ground, and it would be sticking out almost like a zombie coming back from the dead. He would crawl out of the burning rubble, and he would start moving rubble and bricks out of the way, and he would see burned clothes on the ground. There would be smoke everywhere, and he would put his head down, ripping his mask off. Harry knew that he failed to save the girl from the burning building, and he would have tears in his eyes. He knew that he couldn't be a hero anymore, not after this. Crowds of people could be heard in the distance with loud microphones, and a voice could be heard telling the crowd Spider-Man had died and that he had fallen. Harry would hear an echo of people crying, screaming, and he would drop his Spider-Man mask in the burning rubble. Harry knew that it was over, and he thought to himself, how could he ever come back? He was doing so well, and he knew that he wasn't worthy of the powers. Harry would walk around the burning rubble, and he would try moving boulders out of the way. He would become angered knowing that he failed, and he would smash the burning boulders out of the way, falling to the ground screaming. He would pick up a boulder and smash it into the burning building, and his spider sense would go off. He would try moving out of the way, but a part of the brick wall would fall on him, and black goo would fall on Harry. He would black out. He would wake up from a noise, and he would slowly crawl up looking at his hands. They were black. He didn't know what he was doing or where he was. He knew that he was in the wrong suit. Maybe he was just seeing things, but no, he wasn't seeing things. He would see that he was in his original Alex Ross gray and black suit, and he thought it felt good. It was stronger than ever before. He would hear a noise echoing, and he could see in the distance a girl on a microphone and a police chief, and they were talking about the passing of Spider-Man and the little girl named Penny Marco. He would see this knowing that he couldn't do anything and that he failed. He would have tears in his eyes looking from above, and the crowd of people would be silent. He thought to himself, whatever this suit was, it must have been from the burning building. He would swing away, and there would be a massive TV screen saying Spider-Man had died, but he would be confused. It would say that it was from a week ago, and he knew right then and there something was wrong. How long ago was he out for? He had many questions, but he felt really tired. He thought he couldn't go back home. He needed to do this on his own. He would swing to Oscorp, and he would go into the vents, falling to the ground. Bernard would be there watching the news, and he would be startled. He would point a gun at Harry, and Harry would tell him that he was still alive, and Bernard would say, where the heck were you? And Harry would say he can't remember. Bernard would tell Harry that he must have liked his old suit better than the new one that he made him, and Harry wouldn't say anything. He would take his suit off, and he would have a rest, and Bernard would tell him that he was going to make him food. Bernard would also tell Harry, he would say, sir, we need to talk to you about your friend Peter. And Harry would look at him, and Bernard would tell him that Peter went to your place last week, and he went into the lab to mix chemicals, and the chemicals ended up blowing up, and Harry would yell at Bernard, asking him if he was alright, and Bernard would put his head down, saying that Peter Parker died from the explosion, and that there was nothing he could do. Harry would get up, and he would start yelling at Bernard, and he would start shouting his name. Harry would start demanding, wanting to know why he went in there and how he found the area, and Bernard would tell him that he just found him in there, and Harry would tell Bernard that he had enough of this, and he told him to shut up, and he would use his webs grabbing his suit, and he would put it on. He would tell Bernard that his life was ruined, and Spider-Man and Harry Osborn are now both dead. He would say goodbye using his webs, going into the vent, leaving. Harry would swing in the rain, and the wind would start to pick up. He knew he needed to eat something to take a rest, but the suit, it felt so good. He didn't have to do any of that. Lightning and thunder would be heard in the distance, and it would start getting louder and louder. Harry thought that he would be Spider-Man once again, but he knew that it was too late for that. He even told Bernard it was officially dead. He would swing on top of a church thinking of his next moves, and he thought that he wouldn't be Spider-Man anymore. Spider-Man failed. He thought he would be something far worse. He had to teach criminals of the city a lesson, and Harry would have tears in his eyes thinking of Peter and thinking of everything that happened up to this point. He thought, why can't he have a normal life? Why did it have to be this way? Why was it this hard? What Harry didn't know is that the suit was slowly taking him over and there was nothing that he could do about it. He would let the rain drop on his suit and he would look in the distance, hearing screaming and lightning bolts in the sky. He thought to himself maybe he should check it out, but he wouldn't. He would just sit in the rain listening and hearing the lightning and thunder. Peter is a week into being Electro in our timeline and his only mission is to find Spider-Man. He would start going crazy knowing maybe he is really dead, but he thought to himself someone with that amount of power couldn't have been crushed to death. He knew Harry was hiding from him and he wanted to finally get his rightful revenge for his Uncle Ben. Peter would be taking out criminals at night, almost frying them to death, but he still knew with great power there must also come great responsibility, and he knew that he couldn't kill anybody. Peter would be the flash in the sky coming down at night, prying on criminals, and he would shock them with an inch of their lives. Peter would steal the version 2 suit of the Silver Goblin suit from the Osborn residence house, and he would use it for his Electro suit, modifying it to fit his needs. He would be on the hunt for criminals at night, and during Harry's darkest night, Peter is about to light it up. Peter would see criminals and they were beating 2 old men in an alleyway. Peter would appear in thin air, shocking them, but one of the thugs would dodge a bolt and it would go into the old man, killing him. Peter would scream and he would dodge attacks, teleporting in front of the thug. He would use his energy and the thug would die, falling to the ground. The other old man would run out of the alleyway screaming for help, and people would see Electro on the streets. A man in a black jacket would get out of the taxi and start taking pictures of Electro, with the old man dead on the ground. Peter would scream, telling them it wasn't his fault, and he would teleport away, looking at his hands. He tried to be a hero within the first week, but then he got somebody killed. He would scream, teleporting to different locations, and he would make his way to the church. He would be floating in the air, and lightning would be going off in the sky. Peter would slowly see a shadowy figure in the distance straight ahead of him, and he couldn't make it out what it was because there was too much lightning. He would go and teleport further into the sky looking around, and he couldn't believe his eyes. It couldn't be him. Harry would be crying, letting the rain fall on him, and lightning and thunder would be getting louder and louder, and he would look around seeing lightning. A bolt would shoot off in the sky and his spider sense would go off. Peter would see the figure dodge the attack and he would appear in front of him. A loud noise would say, "You knew this was coming, Harry. You can't escape me." The noises in the sky were getting louder and louder, and the lightning would strike the tower. A part of the church would crack and the cross would break. Harry would dodge the attack and he would use his webs grabbing the cross, but the energy would move it and it would break. A face would show itself and Harry couldn't believe his eyes. It had to be ghosts. It would be a giant face of Peter and he would shapeshift into pure energy form. Harry would yell at Peter, asking him if it was him. He would say the one and only, and he would use lightning. Harry would dodge the attack, and the symbiote would latch onto the church while crawling into the church. Echoes of voices could be heard, and the rain was getting louder, distorting it. Harry would yell, telling Peter what happened to him, and he would say that he didn't kill his Uncle Ben, and Peter would start laughing, saying that this was a gift, and he would say he was happy the way he is now. He would tell Harry the gift was from Norman Osborn and Uncle Ben, and he would tell Harry he was going to finish him off and finally take his revenge. Peter would scream and a massive shockwave would go into the air, and Harry would crawl out of the church free falling. Peter would try shocking Harry, but he would dodge the attacks. He would start swinging through the city and Peter would race him using his lightning bolts, but Harry would dodge all of the attacks. Harry would yell at Peter, telling him that he didn't want to do this, but now he's giving him no choice. Peter would laugh, telling Harry that he wasn't worthy of those powers and that the suit would fit him better. Harry knew he needed to overload Peter, and he would swing onto an electrical tower and Peter would summon a massive bolt, but Harry would dodge the attack in time and he would make it out of the way quickly on a building. He knew that he had the high ground and Peter was soon going to overload. Peter would see what he was about to do, telling Harry that he's smarter than he thinks, and he would teleport from behind, shocking him. Harry would fall to the ground and Peter would be laughing, shocking the life out of him, but something would happen. Peter would be confused and Harry would start growing bigger and bigger and he would stop shocking him. He would use a symbiote whip and it would wrap around Peter. He would trip and fall into water, and Harry would see the outline of Peter, and the symbiote would grab him by his legs, smashing him into electricity. Peter would scream overloading, and he would fall to the ground. Peter would try to get up, and he would see that his powers were leaving him. The energy was slowly dying out from the water, and he would turn around, seeing Harry consumed. Peter would be punched in the face, and Harry would scream, but the symbiote would take him over. He would say, "You took MJ from me," and Harry would tell Peter he was a failure, and that it was a burglar that killed his Uncle Ben, and that that he had nothing to do with it, and now they've come full circle. He would say that he was going to be finishing the job, and he would summon a symbiote axe, and it would go onto Peter's shoulder, and he would start screaming in pain. He would stab him in the gut and throw him off of a building, and he would smile, and Peter's body would burst into electricity. A man on the street would run looking at this unfold, and he would start taking pictures of the scene. He would zoom his camera up, and he would see a giant creature. It was Eddie Brock, and he would try taking pictures, and Harry would see this. Harry would jump off of the building into the street, and he would use his webs, throwing the symbiote on his back, dragging him into an alleyway. He would punch Eddie in the face over and over again, and he would smash his face into a brick wall. He would throw him, and he would slide, smashing his face off of a dumpster, and Harry would take his camera, breaking it right in front of him. He would swing on top of a building, and the symbiote would turn back to normal. He would see his hands, and it would go back to black, to the black Alex Ross suit. He knew what he did was wrong, but did he deserve it? He did deserve it, didn't he? The city would hold a public funeral in the morning for Spider-Man, and Gwen Stacy would be the one giving the key to the city. She would tell everyone in the crowd that Spider-Man once saved her life, and now that after everything, he deserved the key to the city, and they would have a casket, and they would put the key on it. Everybody would be clapping, and MJ would cry knowing Harry was gone. Harry would be on a building rooftop not far from the stage, and he would have his symbiote Alex Ross suit. He would look to see everyone, and there would be a gunshot that would go off in the crowd. A man would say, "He took my little girl away from me," and he would start yelling and screaming, "He's no hero," and he would point a gun at Gwen. The man would shoot, and Spider-Man out of nowhere would drop down, deflecting the bullet, and the symbiote would absorb it, throwing it away. Everyone in the crowd would scream, and Spider-Man would be standing tall. They would start clapping, and the man in the crowd with the gun would charge at Spider-Man, and he would try punching him. Harry would catch his fist, sang impressive, and he would kick him in the gut, and he would go flying on the ground. The cops would be running, arresting the man. Captain Stacy would run looking at the man, and he would see that it was Flint Marko. Captain Stacy would run to Spider-Man thanking him, and he would say, "You just helped me capture one of the hardest men in the city." And Spider-Man would ask who he is, and Captain Stacy would say, "That man right there, he's wanted for murder." Spider-Man would ask who he killed, and he would whisper, telling him it was a man in Queens. His name was Ben Parker, and Spider-Man would grab him, telling him, "What did you say?" And Harry would take another look at Flint, and he would swing away, leaving. There would be a paper from the Daily Bugle newspaper saying he's back. Harry would swing to Aunt May's, and she would be posting papers on the street saying Peter Parker was missing, and Harry would walk down the street seeing this happen. Harry would tell Aunt May he needed to talk to her about Peter. She would tell him if everything was alright, and Harry would sit on the couch, and Aunt May would tell Harry what is wrong, and Harry would say there was an accident at the lab, and Peter died in a lab accident at Oscorp, and that they just found out today. She would have tears in her eyes, saying that Ben and now Peter, and Harry would say he was sorry, but she would tell him to leave, and he would put his head down, and she would say never come back, and Harry would freeze, turning around. He would go off, telling her that he did the best he could to help Peter, but Peter couldn't take care of himself in the real world, and he would say that he tried his best to help him out and protect him, and he would look at a picture of him and Pete. Harry would pick it up, smashing it on the ground, and he would kick the door open, and the door would break. MJ would hear all of this, and she would come outside running to Harry. She would say she was worried about him, and she would say, telling Harry what happened to Peter, and he would shake his head, saying that he couldn't talk anymore. He would walk away, and she would grab his hand, and he would tell her to let go, and she would cry, demanding to know what happened to him, and Harry would push her on the ground, saying he died. Harry would yell, saying he brought it on himself, and that he couldn't go back in time and fix it. The damage was already done, and she would start crying, telling Harry to wait, but he would say that he missed the part where that was his problem, and he would walk away. MJ would cry, and Aunt May would run to her aid. He would go into the shadows, into an alleyway, and transform into his symbiote suit. Harry knew he had to see what was up with this Flint Marko guy, and he wanted to go to the police station. Spider-Man would swing into the streets, rushing to get to the police station. He knew that he would finally uncover the truth behind that fateful day. He would hear a sonic blast, and the symbiote would scream. Harry would swing to the side of a building, looking around, and he could see people screaming, and it was the Shocker. He was back, but not for long.